Coming up next on the Union Label will be a conversation with J.W. Cleary, former president of the NAACP in Paducah for many years and a member of Steelworkers Local 550 at the atomic plant. Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig, and welcome back to the program as well. Now, in the intro, I gave away my age calling it the atomic plant. It's all I could do to keep from calling it carbide. How long have you been out there?
I've been out there right at 23 years, and looking forward to retiring here in the next 2 years.
Well,
can't wait.
I understand. Well, let me begin by asking you the same two questions I ask everybody on the program. Number one is, what has the union meant to you individually? And number two, what has the union meant to the working class in America?
Barry, the way I look at it for what it meant to me is I grew up when my daddy actually worked at the Vord's nightclub as a waiter. But then a break came in Calvert City and started hiring people, and he was one of the he was the first African American to ever work at one of the which at that time was called Air Products, or no, Air Core Alloys at that time. Mm-hmm. And of course now they're called SKW. But Dad always felt like that the union gave him an opportunity to be on the same page with somebody else. And then history shows that really, in a way, the labor union was a big asset to America because of the fact, when you think about it, you can't have one side up and the other side down, meaning the African American, the white American. In other words, you need to come up together. So the part that a lot of time white American didn't understand was, if we can get the African Americans producing and making a living and trying to do the right thing, then it just makes the whole community and the country proceed further on. Mm-hmm. So I really believe that, in fact, it hurts my heart to know that you got people in higher up positions that feel like the labor union is not as vital now as it used to be. And I think it's more vital now than ever before. Mm-hmm. Because we can look at the situation even here in Paducah, Kentucky. I can remember when Lourdes Hospital was trying to go unionize, and they're here, Western Baptist was over here looking at the situation. Well, but what happened was, by what Lourdes was doing, Western Baptist say, hey, we got to treat our people better. So that was the uniqueness of it. Whereas sometimes what some person do, then it makes the other person say, hey, look here, we got to do better for ourselves.
Before the program, I emailed you a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and I'm going to paraphrase it, and he said that the labor hater and the labor baiter is invariably a twin-headed monster spewing anti-Negro epithets from one mouth and anti-labor propaganda for another. And I think that really says it well.
It does, and the reason why that is because of the fact that white American at that time, now I'm not saying the way it is now, but at that time, you ask the African American, what do you want? Well, I want the same thing that you want. I want to be able to have a nice home, have a nice vehicle, be able to send my kids to college and give them a good education. Well, they knew at that time that the fact that if the union really took off, which the philosophy of the union was everybody with equal pay, so therefore that would give them the economics or the money power in order to be on the same level as they are, to the point of where it's being able to do some of the things that white American could do. Mm-hmm. But they didn't see the big picture. The big picture, it was an asset to all of us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how's the job changed out there since you've been out there?
I feel like probably education is probably one of the biggest things that we're having problem with. A lot of our young folks coming in, they don't really realize the significance of a labor union, that the fact that that management can't just treat the employees bad, in a way of speaking. In other words, when you're in management, they can get rid of you with just
no reason.
With no reason. That's exactly right. With no reason. But in the union, being a union member is what young folks don't understand, is the fact that it gives them a little situation to the point of whereas they got a case. Why did you fire that young man? And we've seen people fired, and because of arbitration, they come back to work. And then they had to pay them all those back taxes and that type of thing. Or back income.
Back wages, right.
So this is the part that the young folks don't understand.
And in fact, I've talked to a number of union leaders, in fact, some on the program, who said that, you get a young fellow who maybe worked after school in high school, some minimum wage job. They go to work at a factory with a union, and they've got good pay, good benefits, good vacation, and they think the company gave it to them. And they have said that where they think unions fall down is not educating young people that it was the union that fought for this, that negotiated this. Do you see that this is sort of what you're saying?
Exactly. In fact, you've always said this also, whereas we got to make sure that the younger folks know the philosophy behind the labor union. All it is trying to give equal rights for everybody is all what it amounts to. And the sad part about it to me is management. Sometimes you got some of them so naive that the fact that if I make $10 an hour, that means they're going to make $12 an hour. If I make $20 an hour, they're going to make $22 or $23 an hour.
Oh, union wages definitely push up.
Right.
Yeah, whenever the union gets a raise, the management
gets a raise.
Right.
And a lot of management people are so naive, but yet still they'll run the labor union down. And that still hadn't changed. And what's hurting is the fact, if you look at the philosophy of the labor union itself, it just seems like the percentage of labor union is constantly going down.
Well, going back, in your other hat you've worn as president of the NAACP, how long were you president here?
I was president over 20 years, and I never will forget what W.C. Young talked about, is the fact that he had his labor card in one hand and the NAACP card in another hand. For African Americans, it just went hand in hand because of the fact you couldn't have one without the other one. Because of the fact that labor union would give you the opportunity of getting freedom, getting equal opportunity, and this type of thing.
You mentioned W.C. Young. I wonder how many young folks remember him, just by way of background for those of you who don't. He was a national labor and civil rights leader from Paducah, always stayed in Paducah. His office was in Chicago, I know, when he retired. And the highest honor that the Western Kentucky Area Council bestows is the W.C. Young Award. A remarkable man. I'm very fortunate to have known him. He grew up, of course, in Paducah when it was Jim Crow segregation.
Right.
And may I ask how old you are?
I am 55 years old.
Do you remember Jim Crow that far back? I'm kind of thinking you might be just a little bit young.
I am a little young, but I can remember for situations like going into the back door of Bonton's restaurant, barbecue place here in Paducah. I can remember going upstairs in the movie theater, whereas the African Americans had to go upstairs, whereas the white Americans went downstairs and this type of thing. And I can remember to the point of whereas you had water fountains that was for white only and black, and then you had ones for black only. But then again, white Americans truly made a difference in the changing of time because of the fact you had some good white Americans to the point of where I said that that's not right and that's not fair. So therefore, I mean, this last Fred Paxton that did this $1 million endowment for the McCracken County Career Endowment Program. In other words, his philosophy was that money be used for the African American community to help try to level the playing field. So in a community of this nature, he knew that the playing field wasn't level. In other words, white Americans had more advantage than black Americans, and this here is to kind of help give them a leg up.
How do you see the future of the labor movement, being a longtime labor activist that you've been? What do you think the future will be? Because you're right, the percentage is going down as we ship jobs overseas by the tens of thousands.
I just feel like that it's a situation whereas we can't really afford to do without the labor union. We thank God for people like you and some of Jesse Harris out of Louisville. In other words, they keep pushing for labor, 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 because we've seen the situation whereas greed is something else in this country. In other words, if I can make more money and hurt somebody or get it done less, this is the reason why a lot of people go across seas, because of the fact cheaper labor. In other words, well, that bottom line would be bigger for them. And a lot of times, you know, I don't understand it. In other words, I feel like that if you give back, that it would make a difference. If you do good, let us all do good. Mm-hmm. And then all it's going to do is, if you look at down the road, all it's going to do is help us all.
Mm-hmm. Sort of on those lines, back in the 1960s when General Tire was going great guns in Mayfield, a young fellow to get hired, first thing he would do is go down to Driver Motors and buy a fancy new Roadrunner. If he's an older fella, he'd buy a house and furniture and so on, and that this really boosted the economy. And of course today, I drive past that plant to and from work every day, and it's a pile of rubble. It's gone. Those jobs were shipped overseas. I believe I'm correct in saying that those tires are being built in Mexico and somewhere else. Wayne Chambers, who I believe you know,
right,
was the last vice president there local, and he said that Continental told them that they were doing good work. They were doing just fine, but that they were determined to build these tires as cheaply as possible to send them overseas. Wayne told me he then looked at an ad in the paper for a tire store in Paducah. These Continental tires are more expensive. So it wasn't a break for the consumer. They just wanted to make more money. And of course that was about 2,000 union jobs gone. And you look at the infrastructure in our town, and I think one of the things when people talk about jobs, well, there are jobs and there are jobs. There are good jobs and not so hot jobs. And it seems to me that you really want to build your community up with industrial jobs, and that's unfortunate. Your plant, any idea of the future of that plant? I mean, you hear all kinds of rumors about it. And,
it's been closing down for over 50 years.
I was going to say, yeah.
But regardless what happens, the philosophy, the big picture is, how can we do without nuclear power, in a way of speaking, you know? Maybe it has some negatives, but it also has so many positives. I mean, you take the attitude, whereas nuclear power, I mean, it can bring power to a whole city of New York or Chicago or anything. So I mean, it's kind of like they like to maybe do away with it, but they really know. I think the big picture, they see the big picture that we really need it. Because now they're talking about, whereas we've heard that 2010, 2012, now they're going all the way back to, say, 2015 already, you know, and so it's going to be there a while.
So you think the plant will stay open for?
I think it will stay open. Technology, you got new technology. They supposedly working on newer stuff to try to minimize, but be able to do the same thing, but make it in a smaller version of it. But we feel like that it's going to still be there a while. We really and truly do, because of the fact that they just keep seeming like putting a date further and further back.
Mm-hmm. We had talked about a few minutes ago younger people not understanding or appreciating the struggles that unions went through. How about young African Americans they grew up in Paducah where Jim Crow laws are gone, legal segregation is gone. Do they know about the struggles of the 60s, do you think?
Education, no, they don't, in a way of speaking. In other words, we as older people, still try to instill in our young folks not to get discouraged. Believe, we know, you know, and I know that the fact racism is still around, sure, to the point of whereas, but don't let that bother you. In other words, you got to get in your mindset to the fact that whereas you might have to run just a little faster, or you might have to jump just a little higher in order to get where you want to go. But once they realize that you're willing to do whatever it takes, then everything's okay. But what tends to happen is, in reality, is the fact that they feel like they can discourage you. In other words, maybe throw something your way to the point of that be negative, and then you blow all up, and next thing you know, you get fired. Well, they won. So we try to still take the attitude. They say, well, I don't want to work at so and so and so and so because it's racist. Well, you're gonna figure. I mean, you're gonna see some type of form of racism everywhere, and not necessarily black and white all the time. It's the haves and the have-nots, you know. And so I don't know. I think that's just challenges that you're gonna be thrown at your way, and you just gonna have to try to overcome them.
That's interesting. Many years ago, I was interviewing W.G. Harvey, of course, who was the first African American to be on the city commission here, and he said, the issue is not black and white, it's green, it's economics, it's haves versus have-nots, that you're poor regardless of your race. And I thought that was a very interesting point to make with it. Now, you said you never held an office in the union out there. You were a delegate, of course, to the area council many years. What do you think makes a good union leader from the perspective of a rank and file member?
Being able to treat people like you like to be treated. And the only reason why that I never participated for is having an office in the union per se. And like you said, I was one of the delegates for USEC, Lockheed Martin, Union Carbide. It's been made many names. But it's the fact that I was so busy at the time working with the NAACP. Why do I want to take on one job and then I take on 3 or 4 jobs and ain't no good in any of them, in a way of speaking. Mm-hmm. You know, and of course, even coming with the NAACP, a lot of people took the attitude that JW, you don't raise Cain and keep up a bunch of mess like a lot of our past presidents. You not as tough as you need to be. But you know, I've learned in life that you can get more done with cream and sugar than you can with salt and pepper. I never will forget, Robert Coleman used to always stress this to me, and he's right. If I raise Cain, they don't want me on the inside. I'll be on the outside where I can't get nothing done. So I got to still try to compromise. In fact, we see this even with the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, you got to give and take. You know, it ain't always going to go. We always talk about the Democratic way, but it's not always going to go your way. But you can't let that upset you. You got to just say, hey, the next time it might go my way. Kind of like knocking on doors. You know, you're trying to apply for a job or whatever. You might knock 3 or 4 times and the door get closed in your face. But that 5th or 6th time, hey, boom, I hit bingo, you know. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think a good leader, you got to take the attitude, what would I do in a situation of that nature? Mm-hmm. Treat people like you like to be treated. You know, I can't raise Cain with somebody and get anything done. Now we tell our union, our foremen out at work, is you treat me like a man or you treat me with respect, then I'm gonna work harder when the chips are down. I'm gonna go that extra mile for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Robert Coleman, of course, who was, I believe, Robert set the record for the longest serving member of the city commission. I think I'm right about that.
That's exactly.
And of course, W.C. Young was his cousin.
Right.
Tell us what you remember about W.C. Young. Have you had any good W.C. Young stories?
Well, W.C. Young to me is, I never will forget, probably one of the saddest moments of his life. And I was in on it and it made me feel so special when, of course, you know, he worked with our governor and
Ned Breathitt.
Yeah, and he worked with, they just thought W.C. Young hung the moon. And I never will forget the fact that when we had to move out, they actually had him in my office right down at the executive end. I never will forget it. And I helped him move all this stuff out, you know, and he was actually going to retire. And of course, when he retired, he was still in his 70s, you know, because W.C. was he didn't know no other way. And W.C. took the attitude, whereas if I could help somebody, then my living wouldn't be in vain. And he actually took that. And W.C. wasn't a person, whereas he only helped the African American, he helped the people in general. That's the reason why that he took the attitude of being a people person. Not a black person, not a white person, but a people person. And that's the uniqueness of W.C. Young. In fact, W.C. Young is the one that instilled into me. He got me a member of the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, or he would encourage people to join these different groups and organizations. participate in city government, county government, this type of thing. How can we be effective if we're not involved in the decision making? So that was what W.C. Young tried to instill in us. And he said, when you go and talk to somebody, talk to them with respect. They're thinking that you're going to get there and raise Cain and this type of thing. But talk to them like you got some sense and say, hey, man, this man here, he pretty well know what he's doing. So this was some of the values that W.C. tried to teach us.
The thing that always intrigued me was, even though his office was in Chicago for a lot of his labor career, he always maintained a home here, which was down the street from his church, Washington Street Church.
Next door.
Next door, it sure was. Exactly what it was next door. And when in 1994, the council bestowed the first award on him. Remarkable person, just a terrific fit. And again, I just wonder how many young people know about him.
I don't really believe that as many of them know about him as it should. That goes back to sometimes the African American community as a whole. We're lacking on for as trying to instill in our youth or whatever. But I think those days are changed to the point of whereas just like read the other day about this first grader that already had a third grade education in a way of speaking. You know, in other words, used to we would wait till somebody else do this or do that for our children. Now many of us are taking the attitude that we're going to do this and that for our children ourselves. And so I don't know. I think things are changing to the point of whereas people are beginning to understand a lot more.
Tell you another thing too about unions, maybe I'll emphasize more, is I was talking to Jim Key, who is in your local out there. Of course, you know Jim.
Right.
And his daughter graduated from Murray State and went to Oxford. Well, I was talking to Steve Earle with the mine workers, and I know you know Steve as well. His son is doing a PhD in history at Cambridge. And these are the children of union members, and about how union wages enabled union members to send their kids to college. And that's very important to stress, I think.
Well, and you know, and you're right. Just like when equal opportunity came about, and Dr. King talked about that we as African Americans truly needed the labor union, whereas we can be able to do some of the things that for us with our children and this type of thing in order to make a difference down the road. But really, what was happening is that goes back to what you were saying for us economics. Even some of your poor white folks, they got on board with Dr. King, not wanting everybody to know what they were doing, but they said, well, now, wait a minute. This man here is really making a lot of sense. I want to be able to have equal opportunity like everybody else. Because it wasn't only the African Americans that maybe didn't have a up hand for us making a difference. You had a lot of your poor white Americans that was having problems also. So that was the reason why, if you look back, that's probably the reason why that the struggle of the labor movement and the civil rights movement, they join hand in hand. You know, it really and truly does. Because of the fact it just brings everybody up better of being equal.
And again, going back to the thing about young people, one of the questions I have asked union leaders many times is, how do you think you get better participation at union meeting? Now, typically a monthly union meeting, you might draw 10–15% of the membership. And did you see that also in the NAACP?
Not only the NAACP, Craig, you got it in your churches, you got it in your organizations. You even got it in your city and county government, in a way of speaking. You go down to City Hall a lot of time when decisions are made. The fact that you only got a handful of people in there, in other words, that everybody waits on somebody else to do. That's the reason why you're so. It amazes me, or it makes me feel so good to see somebody that's trying to make a difference. You know, those people that sit on the sideline and raise all that cane, what have you done lately? In other words, the old saying is, go look in the mirror and say, tell me what you're doing to make a difference. And believe it or not, just a little bit, everybody doing just their part can make a difference for all of us. But you're right, it ain't very many people that are there.
And it's across the board. There's a book that I always recommend. The book is called Bowling Alone. And the premise of this book was this fellow there was a bowling league, and it had been going for years and years and years, and suddenly it stopped. And he thought, why did that happen? Then he looked at churches, he looked at unions, he looked at different groups, and as a society, we don't do things as a group anymore on many things. And I think that's a very difficult question. Well, certainly, union members, union officers said, you know, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be president of AFL-CIO.
Right.
But again, it's a typical situation where you have on a monthly union meeting, 10, 15% show up. And how do you get young people active and motivated? And of course, I do teach history, obviously, but I think if you teach labor history and you tell them a little bit about the struggle, they find that interesting.
Right.
About how in the old days, you know, union guys, they got their heads busted, they were killed, they were thrown in jail, all this violent resistance to it. And again, go back to what I said, when you go to work at a place like the atomic plant or one of the Calvert plants and you've got this big salary and these great benefits and all this, you think, wow, the company, they're so nice, they gave it to us. And they didn't. And I think that's where, that's one thing where I think unions could really do a better job. That's what the union officers tell me, that they could do a better job.
But individuals need to do a better job. A lot of time what happens is the president or the vice president or one of the officers, they don't try to, they're so into their self of trying to do whatever they can for themselves, that the fact they don't reach back there and try to say, hey, look here, I better get this little young kid to try to get them or her involved and help make a difference. And we got the same thing, even some of our businesses. We look around, people are running their businesses, they look around, they had young folks involved that they all seem like they should have been trying to show them the business, show them how to go about doing this and doing that. But whereas next thing you know, they're ready to retire and they ain't got nobody to carry the legacy on. Mm-hmm. So it's the same way with our churches and churches. They have to work on trying to get young folks involved because they're not going to be there forever. Mm-hmm. I've been a member of this family reunion on my daddy's side for over 20 years. We going to Las Vegas this year for, I think it's the 24th anniversary because the 25th is next year. In other words, but we constantly worked on trying to get the kids involved, having activities for the kids, kind of what you're saying, because what we want to do, we got to take the attitude that they want to do something different. Yep. So you got to do stuff for the kids, the young folks.
You know, Jeff Wiggins, our good friend, said that when you leave a place, it behooves you to train 2 people to take your place, and I think that's absolutely true. But it's very frustrating when you look across the board, and as said, and I've talked to lots of union leaders about this, when you've got a union of, how many do you all have in your local about?
Oh, shoot, man.
Well over 1,000.
Yeah, somewhere around 1,300, I think.
And to get them to turn out, that's the problem. So.
But then what's happening there is the fact that you got this group and that group, they kind of coming together, so you know it makes it really bigger, but still, like you said, it still goes back not having very many members there when the decisions are made.
We're out of time. I appreciate you coming and hopefully come back again soon. My guest was J.W. Cleary. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.